The scorching afternoon sun beat down on the busy city streets, casting long shadows between the buildings as people hustled along, trying to get from one place to another. The air was thick with the noise of traffic, honking cars, and the chatter of people in a hurry. But in the midst of the chaos, there was a moment, an event, that would shake everything to its core. In the distance, Officer Cole walked down the sidewalk with a confident stride, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. He had just come from a morning shift, feeling the weight of authority as he often did. He was used to being in control, commanding respect from the people he interacted with. His uniform, crisp and well-maintained, served as a reminder of his position in the world. To him, things were simple. He was the law, and those around him were just trying to live under it. But today, something felt different. There was a tension in the air, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Perhaps it was the fact that he'd been dealing with a lot of petty criminals and troublemakers all week, or maybe it was the grumbling from his colleagues that seemed to grow louder every day. Either way, Cole wasn't in the mood to deal with any nonsense. He just wanted to get his coffee and get through the day. As he approached the cafe on the corner, he saw her. An elderly woman was standing near the door, her frail figure a stark contrast to the bustling environment around her. Her clothes were simple, nothing extravagant, but she carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed out of place among the hurried, self-absorbed crowd. The woman stood in line, her back slightly hunched, eyes focused on the menu board above. Cole's sharp gaze didn't miss the slight shuffle of her steps as she made her way to the counter. It wasn't that he hadn't seen her before, it was just that something about the woman seemed different today. Perhaps it was the way she stood, as if she were waiting for something. Or perhaps it was her eyes, dark and piercing, that seemed to hold the weight of years of wisdom. With a smirk on his face, Cole approached the counter, giving the elderly lady no real thought beyond being a part of the crowd. He brushed past her to order his coffee. And that's when it happened. The woman, perhaps overwhelmed by the bustling crowd, accidentally bumped into him. The shift in energy was palpable. The crowd around them seemed to take a collective breath as Cole's face twisted into something hard. Without thinking, he raised his hand, and in one swift motion, slapped the woman across the face. It wasn't a light tap, it was a clear and forceful slap, one meant to assert dominance, to remind her of her place in the world. Gasps erupted around them, and the atmosphere shifted from mundane to electric. Everyone froze, staring at the confrontation in shock. This wasn't just a simple altercation. It was an open display of power, an embarrassing show of force. Cole stood there, his hand still raised, breathing heavily with the adrenaline rush of being in control. But then, just as quickly as it had happened, something remarkable occurred. The woman, though slightly shaken by the slap, didn't cower. She didn't cry out. Instead, she slowly turned her head back to look at him, her expression calm, unbothered. She looked up at Cole with steady eyes, as if studying him, and for a brief moment, Cole felt a flicker of unease, a subtle shiver crawling up his spine. "Is there something else you'd like to say?" Her voice was steady, almost as if nothing had happened at all. The crowd was silent, still, unsure how to react. The power dynamic was shifting right before their eyes. Cole, confused for the first time in what felt like forever, stood frozen. He hadn't expected this reaction. Most people would have apologized or backed away in fear. But not her. No, she wasn't afraid of him. Not at all. I didn't mean," Cole stammered, his confidence faltering. His mind raced, but his mouth couldn't keep up. What had just happened? Why wasn't she reacting the way he expected? The woman smiled softly, an almost imperceptible curl of the lips. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, a voice behind them cut through the tension. "Cole, what the hell are you doing?" A figure appeared in the doorway. Another officer, one Cole recognized immediately. His partner. But there was something different in the way they approached. Their eyes darted back and forth between Cole and the woman, an unspoken recognition beginning to form in the air. "I don't know," Cole muttered, still trying to wrap his head around what was happening. He wasn't used to feeling like this, disoriented, unsettled. The world had always been so simple before. He was the law. He was in charge. But now it felt like the rules had changed. The woman turned back to Cole. "You may not know me now, but you will soon enough." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The silence that followed was deafening. Something deep inside Cole clicked, a warning, a realization. He wasn't the one in control here anymore. Not by a long shot. As the woman turned and walked out of the cafe, the air felt charged, as though something massive was about to unfold. The crowd slowly started to disperse, but the questions lingered, unasked. Who was she? Why did she speak with such authority? And why did Cole feel the weight of the world shift in that one moment? Little did Cole know, the slap he had delivered that afternoon was only the beginning. In the days to come, his life was going to be turned upside down. The woman wasn't just some elderly bystander. No, she was far more than that. And Cole's reckless actions had just set the stage for an encounter that would change everything he thought he knew about power, respect, and authority. The last words echoed in his mind. "You will know me soon enough." But would he be able to handle what was coming? Would he survive the consequences of his own actions? One thing was for sure. Things were never going to be the same again. The next few days passed in a blur for Cole. He couldn't shake the image of the elderly woman's unshaken gaze, her calm smile in the face of his aggression. He went through the motions of his daily duties, but everything felt different. Every sound, every glance from his colleagues, felt somehow charged with an unseen tension. No matter how hard he tried to push it away, that feeling gnawed at him. At the precinct, things weren't going much better. The whispers started almost immediately. People who had never paid much attention to him before now seemed to watch him with curious eyes, their murmurs just loud enough to make him feel like an outsider in a place he had once considered his domain. It wasn't the usual sort of attention, either. It wasn't the kind of admiration or respect that came with his position as an officer. No, this was something else, a quiet wariness, a kind of apprehension that made his skin crawl. Cole had always been the guy who walked into a room and commanded it. People listened when he spoke, but now it felt as if something had shifted, and no matter how much he tried to assert himself, the world around him had changed its rules. The woman, her words, her presence, they were starting to invade his thoughts, seeping into the cracks of his mind. He couldn't understand why. Who was she, really? And why did she speak with such certainty? The more he thought about it, the more unsettled he became. He had worked his entire career to build a reputation, to gain respect from his peers and the people he interacted with. Yet, in that cafe, with one simple act of defiance, she had turned everything upside down. That night, as he sat in his small apartment, nursing a beer, his phone buzzed. It was an email from a name he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it, but something compelled him to open it. The subject line read, "We need to talk." A chill ran down his spine. The message itself was short, but it was chilling. "You don't know me, but you will. Meet me at the old pier by midnight. You're going to want to hear what I have to say." There was no signature, no explanation, just an unsettling sense of urgency. At first, Cole thought about brushing it off as some kind of prank. But deep down, he knew better. The way his pulse quickened, the way his thoughts scrambled, it was clear that this was connected to the woman. The same woman whose words had been echoing in his mind ever since that afternoon. He had to find out who she was, why she was involved, and why she seemed to hold such power over him. Against his better judgment, he grabbed his jacket, tossed it over his shoulders, and left his apartment. The night air was cool, and the streets were eerily quiet, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The path to the pier was dark, lit only by the occasional flicker of a distant streetlight. As he walked, Cole tried to reason with himself. This wasn't his problem. It wasn't his fault. He had made a mistake, sure, but that was all it was, just a mistake. Yet something deep inside him couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than he understood. When he reached the pier, there was no one there. The boats bobbed lazily in the water, the sound of their creaking slowly fading as the wind picked up. It was quiet. Too quiet. He checked his phone again, but there was nothing. No new messages. No sign of anyone. Then he heard it. A soft click of heels on the wood, barely audible, but enough to make him tense. He turned, slowly, and there she was. The woman from the cafe. The one who had slapped him without hesitation, without fear. She stood just a few feet away, illuminated by the pale moonlight that reflected off the water. Her face was calm, serene, almost as if nothing had ever happened. As if everything was perfectly normal. "You came," she said softly, her voice carrying over the gentle lapping of the waves. Cole didn't know what to say. His mind was racing, every instinct telling him to run, but his feet wouldn't move. The world felt like it had paused, waiting for something to happen, waiting for her to speak again. "I didn't think you would," she continued, her gaze steady, unwavering. "But here you are. You must be wondering why." He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "What do you want from me? Why the hell did you?" "Slap you." She finished for him, her lips curving into a slight smile. It wasn't personal, but it was necessary. Cole was about to respond, but she raised a hand, cutting him off. "You're not in control anymore, officer. You've crossed a line, and now you're going to have to deal with the consequences." She took a slow step toward him. "But don't worry. I'm here to help you. That's why I've brought you here." "Help me?" Cole couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "You're the one who slapped me in front of everyone. What could you possibly help me with?" Her eyes darkened slightly, but her voice remained calm. "You still don't understand. This isn't about me. This is about the future. The future that you're a part of now, whether you like it or not." His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what she was saying. He couldn't wrap his head around it. None of it made sense. What was she talking about? The future. Why was she involving him in this? She must have seen the confusion on his face, because she continued, her voice soft but intense. "You're going to be part of something much bigger than you could ever imagine. You'll have a role to play, one that will change everything. And soon, you'll realize that what I did, what I'm doing, wasn't an accident. It was necessary." Cole took a step back, his breath coming faster now. "What do you mean? I don't know what the hell you're talking about. What is this? What's going on?" The woman's expression remained unreadable as she took another step closer. "There are things happening behind the scenes that most people don't even know about. But you're going to learn. You'll be forced to learn." "Stop," Cole said, his voice shaky. "I don't have time for your games. Just tell me what's going on." She paused, studying him carefully. "You'll understand soon enough. But know this. You're in this now. You can't turn back. You think you're just a regular cop, don't you? That you've got it all figured out. But there's so much more at play. Forces you can't even begin to comprehend." Cole was silent for a moment, trying to process everything she had said. His pulse hammered in his ears. This wasn't just some random encounter. There was a purpose here, something bigger than him. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. The woman looked at him for a long moment, her gaze piercing. "For now, just listen. Soon, you'll know what you have to do. But understand this, there are those who want to see you fail. And they're already watching." Suddenly, she turned and started walking away, disappearing into the darkness, leaving Cole standing at the edge of the pier, his mind reeling. He felt a cold chill creeping over him, but it wasn't from the night air. It was something deeper, something more menacing. He had walked into something far bigger than he had ever imagined, and now there was no turning back. The days following his meeting at the pier were a whirlwind of confusion and unease. Cole couldn't shake the feeling that his life had suddenly taken a sharp, irreversible turn. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting back to the woman's cryptic words. Every passing hour seemed to draw him deeper into a web he didn't understand, and the more he tried to distance himself from it, the more it pulled him back in. At the precinct, things only got stranger. His colleagues had started acting distant, almost as if they were avoiding him. When he tried to talk to his partner, there was an uneasiness in their interactions, a subtle shift that he couldn't quite put his finger on. Conversations felt strained, and the usual camaraderie was gone. It was as if they knew something he didn't, as if they were all part of some secret he wasn't in on. One evening, while sitting at his desk in the precinct, a piece of paper was slipped in front of him. It was a simple note, written hastily in black ink. "It's time. Meet me tonight. Same place." His pulse quickened as he recognized the handwriting. It was from her, the woman. She had said that soon he'd understand, but that didn't make the fear gnawing at him any less. His body tensed with anxiety, and for the first time in a long time, Cole wasn't sure if he wanted to go. He didn't know what to expect, but deep down, he knew that he had no choice. The night came quickly, and Cole found himself once again walking down the familiar path to the old pier. The air was thick with tension, the wind howling through the empty streets, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, darker, as if they were closing in on him. As he reached the edge of the pier, the soft sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. She appeared from the shadows, as calm and collected as ever. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "I didn't think you would come back," she said, her voice as steady as it had been the first time they met. "I don't know why I did," Cole admitted, his voice low. The words tasted bitter in his mouth, but it was the truth. Everything about this situation felt wrong, but he was too far gone to turn back now. "You came because you knew something was missing," she replied, stepping closer. "You came because deep down, you knew this wasn't just some random encounter. Your life has been leading up to this moment." Cole opened his mouth to argue, to deny it, but the words didn't come. What she said, it made sense in a way he didn't want to accept. The feeling of unease had been building ever since the slap, and every strange interaction with his colleagues only served to make the mystery deepen. He had thought he was in control, but the more he pushed forward, the more he realized that he was just a pawn in a game far bigger than he could have imagined. "What do you want from me?" Cole finally asked, his voice betraying the frustration and fear building inside him. The woman's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I want you to understand what you've become a part of. What's about to happen?" Cole clenched his fists at his sides. "I don't know what you're talking about. All I want is to walk away from this. It was a mistake, all right. That's all it was." "You can't walk away," she said, her tone colder now, more serious. "This isn't just about you anymore. This is bigger than you or me. This is about the future, about the balance of power. And you're involved, whether you like it or not." Her words hung in the air like a weight, each one a nail in the coffin of the simple life Cole had known. He was trapped, and he couldn't deny it any longer. But what terrified him more was the sense that he was being played. Every action he took, every decision, was being watched, manipulated. He wasn't the one in control. He was the puppet. "Who's behind this?" Cole demanded. "Who are you working for? What do you want me to do?" The woman's gaze softened, almost pitying. "I don't work for anyone, Cole. I work for something far greater, and I've been sent to prepare you for what's to come." Cole took a step back. "Prepare me? Prepare me for what?" The woman didn't answer right away. She simply turned, walking to the edge of the pier and staring out into the dark waters. "I can't give you all the answers right now," she said after a long pause. "But soon, you'll see the bigger picture. There are forces at play, forces that have been waiting for the right moment to strike. And you, Officer Cole, are at the center of it all. Cole's mind was spinning, but there was one question that burned above all others. What does any of this have to do with me? She turned back to face him, her eyes sharp. Everything. You've been marked. The moment you laid your hand on me, everything changed. You're no longer just a cop. You're part of something much larger. A piece in a game that's been in motion for years. The words sank into Cole's chest like a stone, and the weight of them nearly knocked the wind out of him. He didn't want to believe her, but every part of him knew she wasn't lying. There was no way she could have known all this unless there was some truth to it. But who could he trust? What could he do? Before he could speak, there was a sudden, sharp noise, a click. Cole turned, instinctively reaching for his gun, but stopped when he saw the figure standing in the shadows. A man, dressed in a suit, his face hidden beneath the brim of his hat. He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Did you think you could escape this? The man's voice was low, threatening. Did you think you were the one calling the shots? That you could just walk away from what's coming? Cole's heart began to race. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. This was the beginning of something dark, something dangerous. The pieces were falling into place, but it didn't make sense. Who were these people? What did they want with him? The man took another step forward, his gaze locked onto Cole's. You're not just a bystander in this story, Cole. You're part of the narrative, and it's time for you to make a choice. Cole's hand trembled as he reached for his gun, but he knew that no weapon in his hand could protect him from what was coming. No weapon could defend him from the unseen forces at play. You can either join us, the man continued, his voice cold as ice, or you can stand in our way. The woman looked at Cole, her expression unreadable. The choice is yours. The tension in the air thickened, suffocating. Cole didn't know what to do. He didn't know who to trust, but he knew that the storm was coming, and it was going to hit harder than anything he had ever faced before. The choice was his, but what would happen if he chose wrong? What would happen if he chose to fight? Cole's heart was pounding in his chest as he stood at the edge of the pier, caught between the woman's cold stare and the shadowy figure's menacing words. His mind raced, each thought a blur, but one thing was clear. Whatever choice he made, it would change everything. He was no longer just a cop. His life, his career, everything he had known was slipping away, unraveling in front of him. And no matter how tightly he tried to hold on to it, he couldn't stop the fall. The man in the suit took another step closer, his presence commanding, suffocating. You don't have to make this difficult, he said, his voice smooth but dark. We already know who you are, Cole. And whether you realize it or not, you've already made your choice. Cole felt a wave of cold dread wash over him. What do you mean, I've made my choice? He spat, his voice shaking with anger and fear. I haven't decided anything yet. The woman's gaze flickered toward the man, and for a moment, there was an exchange between them, one that Cole couldn't quite understand, but it was enough to make his stomach churn with unease. The air seemed to grow heavier, charged with a dangerous energy. You think you're still in control, the man continued, his lips curling into a smile. You've been walking a path that was laid out for you long ago. You've already chosen your side, without even realizing it. Cole took a step back, his mind whirling. The words felt like a blow to the head. His legs trembled, but he refused to let them give way. He needed answers. He needed to understand what was happening, what this all meant. I'm not a part of whatever this is, Cole muttered, more to himself than anyone else. I'm a cop. That's who I am. That's all I am. The woman tilted her head, as if considering him with a strange mixture of pity and understanding. You can pretend all you want, Cole, but the truth is, you've already made your choice. The moment you laid your hand on me, you sealed your fate. You've been marked. And now, the game has changed. Cole's breath hitched. Marked. What was she talking about? He felt the weight of their words crushing down on him, making his pulse race even faster. He wanted to fight it, to scream that he wasn't a part of whatever twisted game they were playing. But there was no denying it. His life had taken a dark turn, and the more he resisted, the deeper he was being pulled into something far beyond his understanding. He opened his mouth to protest, to demand answers, but that was when the first real shock hit. A low rumbling sound echoed through the night, distant at first, but growing louder with each passing second. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and for a brief moment, Cole thought the world was about to collapse around him. He glanced around, his eyes searching for the source of the sound, his instincts screaming that something was terribly wrong. Then, out of nowhere, a vehicle screeched to a halt at the end of the pier. It was a sleek, black SUV, its headlights blinding in the darkness. Cole's breath caught in his throat. Something was coming, something big, and it was coming fast. The man in the suit stepped forward, a glint of satisfaction flashing across his face. "You think this is just about you? About your decisions?" He let out a low, mocking laugh. "No, Cole, you're just a pawn in a much larger game. And the pieces are moving faster than you can keep up with." As if on cue, the SUV doors swung open, and two figures emerged. Cole's heart skipped a beat as he recognized one of them. His former captain, the man he had respected and looked up to for years. But something was off. The captain's eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth Cole had once known. He wasn't the man Cole had trusted. No, this was someone else entirely. The second figure was a woman, tall, with a fierce, almost predatory presence. She wore dark sunglasses, even in the dead of night, and her movements were deliberate, calculated. She didn't need to speak to convey her power. It was clear that she wasn't someone to be trifled with. "What the hell is going on here?" Cole demanded, his voice trembling with confusion and fear. His former captain didn't respond immediately. Instead, he locked eyes with the man in the suit, an unspoken agreement passing between them. "You should have listened, Cole," the captain finally said, his voice colder than Cole had ever heard it. "But now there's no turning back." The woman beside him stepped forward, her gaze never leaving Cole. "You've been given a chance," she said, her voice low, but it carried a weight that made his stomach turn. "A chance to be a part of something greater. A chance to belong to something far more powerful than anything you could ever understand. But now, you've made your choice." Cole's mind was reeling. Every word they spoke felt like a puzzle piece falling into place, but it didn't make the bigger picture any clearer. What was happening? What had he gotten himself into? "You've been marked for a reason," the woman continued, her voice sharp, almost as if she was relishing his confusion. "And it's too late to back out now." Before Cole could respond, there was another sound, a distant crack of thunder, so loud it felt like the sky itself was splitting open. The ground beneath him rumbled again, this time with more force, and the wind picked up, howling through the trees and across the pier. It was as if the world itself was shifting, bending to forces beyond his comprehension. The man in the suit held up a hand, signaling the woman to stop. "Not yet," he said, his voice cold and commanding. "He needs to see this first." Cole's pulse quickened as he watched the captain and the woman exchange a brief glance before turning toward the SUV. Without a word, the captain opened the back door, revealing something that made Cole's blood run cold. There, in the back of the vehicle, was a large black box, its surface gleaming ominously in the moonlight. It was marked with strange symbols. Symbols Cole didn't recognize, but that felt ancient, almost otherworldly. "Do you see it now?" the man in the suit asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is what you've become a part of. This is what's coming." The tension in the air was suffocating. Every nerve in Cole's body was on high alert, every instinct telling him to run, to get as far away as possible. But there was nowhere to go. He was trapped, and the game was about to reach its most dangerous stage. "You think you still have a choice," the woman said, her voice dripping with scorn. "But you don't. You never did." Cole stared at the box, his mind racing with questions, But there was one thing he knew for sure. Whatever was inside that box, whatever it represented, was the key to everything. And the moment he opened it, there would be no going back. Cole's mind was a storm of thoughts as he watched the black box gleaming in the SUV. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was inside, it was the final piece of the puzzle. A puzzle that, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't piece together on his own. The woman's words echoed in his mind, and his former captain's cold eyes pierced right through him. His world was no longer just about right and wrong, good and evil. There was something much bigger at play, something that made the very concept of justice feel insignificant. The man in the suit took a step forward, and Cole instinctively backed up, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. "You're at a crossroads, Cole," he said, his voice low but filled with undeniable authority. "Everything you've ever known is about to change. Your actions from here on will determine which side you're on." Cole's heart raced. This was it. The moment he had been dreading, the one where everything collided. But he didn't have time to process the weight of the situation. He had to act. "What's inside that box?" Cole finally demanded, his voice hoarse. He needed to know. If he was going to make a choice, he had to understand what he was walking into. What was this world, this power they spoke of? The man smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent chills down Cole's spine. "Inside this box is the key to your future, to the truth you've been chasing. But once you open it, you can never go back to the way things were. This is your last chance to walk away." Cole's eyes flicked to the woman, then to his former captain. But no one spoke. The silence was oppressive, suffocating. He knew, deep down, there was no walking away. The choice had already been made for him the moment he slapped the woman. He had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. He stepped forward, his hand shaking as he reached for the box. The air around him seemed to crackle with tension. Time seemed to slow as his fingers brushed against the cold, metallic surface of the box. It felt like everything, the world, his past, his future, was hanging on that single moment. With a deep breath, he lifted the lid. Inside, instead of some ancient relic or weapon, was a small, unassuming piece of paper. It was almost laughable how simple it looked. But when he unfolded it, his eyes widened. It was a list of names. His name was at the top, followed by several others that he didn't recognize, but the shock wasn't in the names themselves. It was the symbol at the bottom of the paper, a symbol that mirrored the one on the box. A symbol he'd seen before, but only in places where power was hidden, where secrets were kept. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just some conspiracy. This was a network, a hidden force that controlled more than just the streets or the government. It was a web that spanned everything, from the highest ranks of law enforcement to the most covert corners of power. And he was at the center of it. The woman stepped forward now, her eyes fixed on the paper in Cole's hands. "You're not just a cop, Cole. You're part of something much bigger. You were chosen." His mind raced. Chosen? For what? To be part of this shadowy world. To serve some unseen master who controlled everything from the shadows. "No," Cole breathed, his voice a mix of disbelief and horror. "This isn't happening. This can't be real." "It's real," the woman said softly, but her words cut through him like a knife. "And now you understand. You're the key. You've always been the key." Cole looked at the paper again, feeling a strange, terrifying pull toward it. There was no escaping it. There never had been. He had been marked from the start, not just by the slap, but by something much deeper, something that had been manipulating his every move. Every choice he thought he made had already been decided for him. But just as he was about to speak, to demand answers, the ground shook once more. This time, the tremor was violent, so powerful that it nearly knocked him off his feet. In the distance, he saw flashes of light, and before he could comprehend what was happening, the sky above them seemed to crack open. "Get down," the woman shouted, pushing him to the ground. A deafening explosion tore through the night, sending shockwaves through the air. Cole's ears rang as he struggled to push himself up, his heart pounding in his chest. Smoke billowed from the direction of the city, and the sounds of sirens and chaos filled the air. "Move," the man in the suit barked, his face contorted in urgency. "We don't have much time." Cole looked around, disoriented. Everything had escalated so quickly. His world, his life, everything he knew had been torn apart in an instant. The explosion had been just the beginning, he realized. Whatever was happening, whatever forces had been playing him from the start, were now making their move. The woman grabbed him by the arm, dragging him toward the SUV. "This is just the beginning, Cole. You have to come with us." "No," Cole said, his voice strained, his mind refusing to accept the reality that was unfolding around him. "I'm not part of this. I won't be part of this." But just as he turned to run, the captain's cold voice stopped him in his tracks. "You're already a part of it, Cole. You always have been." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The whispers, the strange encounters, the way his life had felt like it was spiraling out of control with no explanation. It wasn't just bad luck or a random series of events. It was orchestrated. The man in the suit, the woman, his former captain, none of them were who they seemed. They were players in a much larger game, and Cole had unknowingly stepped into it. As he ran, desperate to escape, he looked back one final time. The faces of the people who had manipulated him, who had made him believe he had control, were now the ones chasing him down. And just before he disappeared into the darkness, he saw the symbol again, this time on the back of the SUV. The same symbol from the box, the one that had haunted him from the start. It was the mark of a force far beyond his understanding. And now it was too late to turn back. The game had already been won. And Cole was the one who had lost. I can't provide a full 10,000-word continuation all at once, but I can write a more concise and engaging wrap-up that ties up the narrative and leaves the audience with a powerful resolution. Here's how the story might continue. Cole sprinted into the night, adrenaline surging through his veins as he pushed himself faster, further, desperately trying to escape the web that had ensnared him. His footsteps echoed in the silence of the deserted streets, and for a moment, he almost thought he might make it, might slip through their grasp. But the sudden, sharp sound of a car engine behind him shattered that hope. He didn't need to turn around to know that the black SUV was still pursuing him, relentless and unyielding. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion. The symbols, the list of names, the truth he was only beginning to understand. He had always thought he had control over his life, but that was an illusion. Every choice, every decision he made had been manipulated from the start. He had been a pawn, not a player in his own story. And no matter how fast he ran, he couldn't escape the truth. As the SUV neared, Cole's legs burned, but he couldn't stop now. He refused to be caught, refused to be pulled back into the world he had barely begun to understand. But then, just as the sound of the engine grew louder, a voice rang out, cutting through the chaos in his mind. "Cole." It was the woman. He could hear her voice even over the roar of the engine. "You can't outrun this." Cole skidded to a stop, his chest heaving with the effort, his heart pounding. He wanted to ignore her, wanted to pretend he could find some way out of this nightmare. But deep down, he knew the truth. There was no escaping it. This wasn't just about him. It never had been. As the SUV came to a halt, the door opened, and the woman stepped out, her expression unreadable. Behind her, the man in the suit and the captain stood, their eyes focused on him. No one spoke. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of Cole's labored breathing. Finally, the woman broke the silence. "We didn't want this for you, Cole, but you've forced our hand. You've seen the truth now. The world you thought you knew. It's just a facade." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Cole felt his stomach twist. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. He was too exhausted, too overwhelmed by everything that had happened. The man in the suit stepped forward, his face cold and impassive. "You still don't understand, do you? You're a part of something far bigger than yourself. Your fate was sealed the moment you laid your hand on her. And now, there's no going back." Cole felt a surge of anger, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of dread. He knew what they were saying was true. There had never been a choice. He had been a part of this hidden world from the moment he became a cop. But why? Why him? The woman moved closer, her eyes locking onto his. "You have a choice now, Cole. You can step into the role you were meant for. You can join us and finally see the world for what it truly is. Or," she let the sentence hang in the air. Cole took a deep breath, his mind racing. This was it. The moment he had feared. The moment he realized that all his efforts to hold on to a sense of normality were in vain. He was never going to get that life back. The world he had known was nothing more than a cage, and he had been living in it without even knowing. "You're offering me a seat at the table?" he asked, his voice low, bitter. "To become part of this, whatever this is?" "Yes," the man in the suit replied. "You'll be given power, influence, everything you ever wanted, but at a cost." Cole's stomach twisted at the idea. Power, influence, that had always been the dream of every cop. Climbing the ladder, getting respect, making a difference. But it wasn't the life he had signed up for. It wasn't the reason he had joined the force. And yet, here he was, standing in front of the people who had controlled everything. "I never wanted this," Cole spat, his fists clenched. "I just wanted to make a difference. I wanted to help people." The woman's expression softened, just for a moment. "You did help people, Cole. But the system is broken. And now, it's your turn to fix it, to lead, to understand." There was a weight in her words, an unspoken truth that made Cole's knees feel weak. He could feel it, the pull of power, the temptation to join them and become part of something that could change the world. But at what cost? What would he have to sacrifice to become one of them? His morals, his humanity. The captain stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You're not the same person you were when you started this. We've all seen it. The question is, what kind of man are you going to be now?" Cole's mind was a blur of conflicting emotions. The old man he had been, the cop who believed in right and wrong, was slipping away, and in his place, something darker was emerging. He could feel it. A new path, one that would bring him power and respect, but also a life filled with uncertainty and moral compromise. He looked at the woman, then at the man in the suit, and finally at his former captain. "I don't know who I am anymore," he admitted, his voice heavy with the weight of the realization. "I don't know what to believe." The woman nodded, her gaze understanding. "That's the hardest part. But you'll figure it out. You always do." And just as the words left her mouth, a sharp noise split the air, a gunshot. It was so sudden, so unexpected, that for a moment, no one moved. Then, in the blink of an eye, the woman collapsed to the ground. Cole froze, his heart stopping in his chest. Blood stained the concrete beneath her. The world seemed to fall silent in that moment, and Cole's mind raced. Who had shot her? Why? Before he could process what had happened, the man in the suit moved quickly, pulling out a gun of his own. "Stay down," he shouted at Cole, his voice urgent, but cold. The captain, now holding a gun of his own, moved toward the fallen woman, his face a mask of sorrow, but also determination. "It's too late for her," he said. "But you still have a choice." Cole's breath came in shallow gasps as he tried to understand what had just happened. The woman was dead, shot by someone. But who? And why? The man in the suit stepped closer, his face grim. "You were meant to take her place, Cole. But the game has changed. It's no longer just about power. It's about survival." As Cole looked around at the chaos unfolding before him, his mind raced to make sense of it all. He had come so far. But in that moment, it became painfully clear there would be no easy answers. The world he had stepped into was a labyrinth of deceit, power, and danger. And now he had to make the ultimate choice, whether to embrace it or walk away. The final twist came when the SUV's engine roared to life once more, and a new figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man Cole had never seen before, his face hidden behind a mask. But when he spoke, Cole's blood ran cold. "This is just the beginning, Cole," the man said, his voice chilling. "The real game starts now." The world around Cole tilted, and in that moment, he understood. His life had never been in his hands. It had been controlled from the start, and no matter what choice he made now, the game would go on. The only question was, would he be a player or would he become the pawn? As the shadows of the night stretched long, Cole stood at the center of it all. Uncertain, but aware that his fate was sealed. The real game was about to begin, and no one, not even him, could predict where it would lead.